Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Not quite everybody doesn't want a no deal. All this tumult makes a no deal Brexit more likely, as Philippe Lombard has just attested. But how would that happen? And the impact it would have here and in continental Europe is far from clear. And there's also the possibility, as we said, of a people's vote, which has been building ahead of steam across the parties, but by no means at the very top of the opposition. Before we talk to two politicians, one for a managed no-deal Brexit, the other for a second vote, David Grossman's been assessing the plans in place for a very sharp exit.
Getting our no-deal ducks in a row, it's a huge task. The government has published 106 technical notices about how businesses, individuals and public bodies can prepare. They've covered such areas as aviation safety and pet passports. If we look at the actions the government says it needs to take, in 56 cases it requires establishing new systems or processes. In a further 14 we need to create a new body or expand capacity in an existing one. In 51 notices it says we need further legislation. In 27 it talks about negotiating agreement with the EU or individual EU countries. And in a further 13 the government identifies the need to negotiate new international agreements. And much of this of course needs votes to be passed in Parliament, which, as we've seen in recent days, isn't in a cooperative mood.
It is a big workload for Parliament. In terms of primary legislation, so bills going through Parliament, we think there are at least 3 bills that have already been introduced that need to be completed before March next year if we're going to be ready for a no-deal outcome. But then there's a huge load of secondary legislation, statutory instruments underneath that, around 700 according to the government minimum, and they've only introduced around a third of those since earlier this year. So there's still a lot more to be done and the time is rapidly running out.
And then there's the technology. As we've seen in countless government IT projects over the years, knowing what needs to be done is not the same as getting it done. The government has identified 55 new IT systems that will be needed in the event of no deal. 12 are critical IT systems at the border. According to a National Audit Office report at the end of October, 11 of the 12 are at risk of not delivering by the 29th of March next year to acceptable quality. Much of the no-deal preparation required, though, is out of the government's hands. It's up to businesses to change the way they work to fit in with any new arrangements. But many businesses, like this dairy I recently visited in Omagh, are holding off spending any money on costly changes until they know it's definitely required. But how are other EU countries doing?
I think there's a clear difference in terms of how open the other governments have been. So the Dutch government, the Irish government have been thinking about this for a long time and telling people what it might mean. The European Commission itself as well started publishing notices on what no deal could mean back in the spring. And it was only in August, late August this year, that our government did the same. So, and then when it has been communicating, the quality of communication, the sort of clarity of information provided has been much greater in certain other member states than here.
So will all these tricky ducks be in a row by March? The PM assured us today that the government will step up preparations, but in politics at the moment, chaos and a flurry of feathers are never far away.
David Grossman, well, John Redwood, a staunch Brexiteer who supports a managed no deal, is here, and we're joined by Kirsty Blackman, the SNP spokesperson for the economy. Good evening to you both. Before we talk about your managed no deal, I must say, because it's all over the front pages tomorrow, the idea is there may well be 48 letters in which would trigger this vote of no confidence. Would you be pleased to see that?
Well, I'd like to talk about the managed no deal, because that, I'm sure, is what is more interest to your audience.
But it would be interesting for the general public, I think.
Well, I'd be very happy to talk about a vote, if we're having a vote, but I'd like to hear from Sir Graham Brady, and then if you want to interview me on another occasion, I'm happy to do that. But you really mustn't stop people learning about what the regime will look like on the 30th of March if we leave on the 29th, because that is what Parliament has legislated to achieve. And I think there have been outrageous scare stories run by the media without any proper cross-examination of why these people say these things.
Is it more likely, do you think, if Theresa May's not there, that there will be a no-deal Brexit, chaotic or managed, whichever?
Well, I'm not speculating on Mrs May. I don't think it makes a lot of difference to this situation, because Parliament has expressed in full legislation that we are leaving on the 29th of March 2019 unless new legislation is brought in to delay or amend that proposition. So I think The government has always said it's preparing for an exit without any withdrawal agreement, and the withdrawal agreement is completely unacceptable to a very wide range of opinion in Parliament.
So what would a managed Brexit look like?
Well,
because there's talk of the border in Northern Ireland, the border with the Republic, the possibility
we have a border at the moment.
We could return to a hard border.
We have an excise border. We have an anti-terrorist border at the moment.
But we'll be out with the EU with no mechanism, no treaty. We'll have no treaties. We'll be outside the European Union era. The Republic of Ireland will be in it. The possibility is that even though the EU says it doesn't want it and the UK says it doesn't want it, there could be a return to border controls. That is against the Good Friday Agreement.
The BBC will never let us explain how this can work perfectly well, and a very large number of people in the public don't believe these scare stories, and they believe business will find perfectly good ways of trading with the EU once we've left, just as we trade perfectly successfully with America and China at the moment without any free trade agreements. Now listen to me about the scare story, about how you won't get just-in-time components in, and that will upset the car industry.
Pharmaceuticals?
Well, let's deal with the car industry one, and what the government can do there, and what I'm recommending they do, is they say we won't have any tariffs on any imported components at all. So instead of there being more friction at the border because of suddenly tariffs on an EU component, there'll be less friction at the border.
Can I just put it to you?
Because we can take the tariff off the non-EU product coming in.
Matthew Hancock,
which the BBC never listens to.
No, Matthew Hancock, the Health Secretary, said people could die on a no-deal Brexit.
And
he is the Health Secretary.
But he's wrong. And I have asked questions about...
You say the Health Secretary, you know more than the Health Secretary about whether or not people within the health service could be at risk.
Look, it's a good idea sometimes to let your guest explain their point of view, and then the public can judge whether we make sense or not. Now, I have asked the government questions, and they've assured me that there is no medicine supplier on the continent that is cancelling their contract or is saying they will not be able to supply goods after the 30th of March if we have left. And the reason why there shouldn't be a problem is that we run the ports, and we don't have to impose any new restrictions or complications if we need to get life-saving medicines in.
Thank you very much, John
Redwood. So, of course, we're not going to kill people by doing this. This is quite wrong, this kind of scare story.
Let me just turn... Well, that's your Health Secretary for you. Let me turn to Kirsty Blackman now. You are at the other end of the scale in which you don't want to leave the EU, but you want a people's vote. You've got about an hour to hear from Jeremy Corbyn that he is going to go for a vote of no confidence in the government. There's been dead silence. You can't go for one and guarantee you'll be taken because you're not the opposition. So you're stuck in limbo.
So what we said is that we would try and work across the parties, and that's what we've been trying to do. And in fact, actually, that's what we've been trying to do throughout this whole process. We've said from the beginning Brexit is bad, but we've also said if Brexit has to happen, we want single market and customs union membership. We've said that very clearly to the Prime Minister. We've reached out to Jeremy Corbyn and tried to make that case with him as well. In relation to the no confidence stuff, what we have done there is, again, tried to reach out, tried to say to the Labour Party, look, you need to support a vote of no confidence. Also tried to say to the other parties, the other opposition parties, it's the strangest thing that, you know, there's possibly 48 letters going in. The only people that currently have confidence in the Prime Minister are the Labour Party. It'd be quite helpful if they would actually consider their position here.
But you have no way of knowing whether Jeremy Corbyn is warming up to the idea of a people's vote, no matter how much other people in the party and very senior people in the party is. We've got no indication that Jeremy Corbyn, even though it was passed at conference, even though it's there, actually wants. And without that, you're scuppered and you have no power.
It would be really, really helpful if their front bench would move towards a people's vote, absolutely. And we need to keep making that case, and we will keep making that case.
But you put emotion in yourselves and it won't go anywhere.
In relation to a no confidence vote, that's distinctly possible, and that's why we're working so hard. But what they have said, and actually pretty clearly in media that I've heard them speaking in today, is that after the meaningful vote, that is the point in time at which they think a no confidence vote. I would rather they did it sooner, because the meaningful vote, goodness knows when that's going to be. If
you ended up in a general election, would you go into coalition with Labour?
I don't think that's not really a decision for me to take, but I'm not sure a coalition would be the thing that I would be going for at all.
Thank you both very much indeed.